Welcome to the SJ Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the SJ Child Show today. I'm so glad to have you here. Wonderful conversation. I know that we're excited because we've been waiting and now it's build up, so that always makes it fun. Tell us a little bit, an introduction and a little bit about yourself and what brought you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jessie Ginsberg. I'm a speech language pathologist. I own a clinic in Los Angeles for over 10 years. And I also have online programs that are global where I teach other therapists and parents how to support their child's communication using sensory strategies. And I should also say I've got 4 kids. I'm a mom of 4 boys. So always have that perspective working with parents as well. But, I really just kind of stumbled into, it's funny because my social handle and kind of known as the sensory SLP. And that was just something that slowly became over time. I was doing podcast interviews and it was enough people who had said to me, so when did you become the sensory SLP? And I'm like, am I that person? Like, I don't recall ever calling. And then I just went with it. It's like, that's catchy. But to me, there's just such an importance of speech therapists being able to understand the sensory system and parents being able to understand their kids' sensory system. And it just makes such a big difference in our lives every single day. And I just really wanted to bring more, education forward to professions and people who otherwise may have not received that kind of education.
Yeah, it's so important across the board because I think that when you are in a specific field, you sometimes take for granted or don't even know what other fields do and other parts of therapies and modalities that are available. And there are so many. And it's great to have kind of more of a detailed look so that we can kind of dissect and see what's best for your child, what looks like they would progress better with what types of therapies. And that's something that I think is important to look at as a team, as I'm sure that you do often in, team building, if you will, and making sure that everyone is working together to support that child and their needs. Looks like we have a little bit of a funny technical lag here, so I apologize for that if that's happening. What do you say? What is the kind of typical day look like for you? And then we'll kind of get into more what sensory speech therapy is and looks like.
Well, that's a fun question. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. That's a fun one because I love to ask that question to other people. So every day is very different, but essentially I'm running 2 businesses. I have our clinic in LA. We have the online programs. So at the current moment, I have, getting 4 kids ready off to school in the mornings and then starting my day. And usually I'm focusing on what can I do online for the first half of my day. And then the second half of my day usually goes to the clinic. But, I do a lot of supervising in our clinic, working with our therapists, training our therapists, and a lot of stuff like this, a lot of writing, a lot of training, a lot of speaking. I just wrote a book that came out recently, and thank you. Yes. Very, very excited about that. So that was kind of the goal of the book, because there weren't really that many ways necessarily for people to come and work with me and my team. We have families who might drive an hour and a half to come for a 30-minute session. And I feel terrible about that. And I'm like, I just want you to know you don't have to do this, it's okay. But some parents, it's just, they want to learn this so badly that it's worth that for them.
Yeah.
And that was, the huge benefit for me in putting out the book was now I can get this information into the hands of people no matter where they are in the world and no matter what kind of budget they're working with, because everyone can get this book.
I love that. Accessibility is so, so important,
Mhm.
especially for information. And it's so hard to imagine that there are places still that have, limited access to information, and as far as the internet and things like that goes. So hopefully Elon did a little bit of help with that, linking it. But I think that it's beautiful that we can reach so many people through books and through in that way. Plus, the online aspect of that also gives it such an easier access for individuals that don't have to drive, in busy LA traffic. I'm in Utah, so I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah,
But I
absolutely.
completely get, how important it is when you find something that you love, and especially find something that is going to work for your child. You'll do anything to do that, and I completely get that. And we'll be going through that this next year. We'll see how that turns out.
Yeah.
um
I mean,
but
I think in therapy, one of the most important things for families is just to find people who can support them where it just feels right. And so many parents say, how do I know that, I'm in the right kind of therapy, or how do I know I'm doing the right thing? And you just ask yourself, does this feel good?
yeah,
Because we know, and we have gut instincts as parents when something doesn't feel good. And
it,
we have a parent who was just in my office this week, and she said at the last clinic they were in, her son would come in and he would cry the whole session, and the therapist would say, no, it's okay, we need to work on him being able to take these demands, and this is normal. And she was like, but it doesn't feel right, are you sure? And she is one of the families who started driving to come and see us. And she would come in, and there was this day where I happened to be in the waiting room. It was maybe his second time coming or something. And he's a little boy. He carries these huge stuffies. They're like his emotional support. So he
yeah,
comes in, he's this little boy carrying these huge animals as big as him. And then he just plops them on the chair in the waiting room. And then when the therapist opens the door, he just runs back. And his mom looks over at me and she just starts crying. She's like, he's never done that before. Like, what am I, chopped liver? He didn't even say goodbye to me. He left the stuffies. And but that's how significant it is when you find therapy that feels good and it's the right fit. You're just gonna know.
yeah. And isn't that interesting that you would say that, because it's such a human thing, right? Follow your instincts, follow, like, that's what we're always taught. But when it comes to parenting a special needs child, I think that so many people get caught up in their own imposter syndrome, basically, and question themselves. And how would I know? Like, I don't know enough. How do I know that this is the best and things? So I love that you said that you have to just feel good about it. And it is so true. It's even in when you have in-home therapy. If you don't feel good, if your child isn't responding well to the therapist, if they're not building a trust relationship right away or within a very short amount of time, then you need to just search out other options, and it's okay. And I
Yeah.
think that parents fear that it's not okay, that they'll be looked at in some way that they're, not doing everything they can. And that's just not the case. Like, doing everything you can involves creating that safe environment, that nurturing environment for that child to grow. And especially being excited to be somewhere, that's where so much can happen. And so much positivity, empowerment. How empowering for that little guy to be able to do that, to leave his stuffies behind and go into, that for himself. And good for you guys for fostering that environment there for them. Yeah, it's so important that parents hear that it's okay to not to go with the first person, or even doctors, right? We people just need to be very picky.
Yeah. And I think parents think like, well, I need to do the right thing. I was told to do this and now I'm here and I'm doing this and it doesn't feel good, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's like, I don't know who said this quote, but it's like the, fear of the pain of would you rather live with familiar pain or unfamiliar pain?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I know this doesn't feel good, but I'm here and I'm doing it and I know what it is. Is it worth uprooting, this what we've created to go and try something new? And, it's just, we don't know what it's going to be like. So it feels risky.
Yeah,
And a lot of
definitely.
parents do reach that point.
How?
Unfortunately, a lot of parents, I don't think necessarily listen to their gut quickly. They have to reach the point of realizing, wow, this really does not work for my family. I see that a lot, at least.
What do you think the level of kind of, this might be a heavy question, the level of saturation in the community to therapists? Like, is there so much need for more, and like as far as like waiting times and things like that? What are you guys seeing across the board with that?
Yeah, it's very hard to get therapy covered by, if you want it covered by your insurance. I'm in California. Our clinic is one of the few left that takes insurance. That's a very, very hard decision to make as a business owner, because insurance isn't fun and insurance
Yeah.
sucks. And it's not like the way to make the most money, but I really feel like parents need to have access to services. And if a parent is able to use their insurance and come to 2 sessions a week instead of pay privately and come to once a week, I'd rather them come twice a week. But it's very hard, I would say, for sure. But I think that the great thing about therapy, or at least if you find the right therapist, is you really want to go into that therapy session feeling like, okay, I'm here to learn from the therapist, and what can I be doing at home? So there's so much you can be doing at home. So it shouldn't have to feel like I'm taking my child to this expert and they're the one who knows what to do. No great therapist would say, I'm the expert in your child. The parent is always the expert in their child. So, taking advantage of the sessions that you have by asking the questions you have, and by making sure you do know what to do at home, so that you do feel like this is extending beyond the therapy room.
Yeah. And I like that. Let's go it kind of into that. As a parent, what should we be looking for? What types of steps? Why would we reach out to a speech therapist? What types of things would encourage us? Why would you say we would need to come and find a speech therapist?
Simple answer, I guess, is that, child's having trouble communicating in whatever form that is. I could speak to, speech therapists do a lot, obviously. In our clinic, we see a lot of little ones. So we see a lot of kids who maybe are late talkers and just aren't hitting those milestones of a certain number of words by a certain age. We see a lot of kids in preschool who, they've been home with their parents, and then they go to school, and then teachers say, hey, we're having trouble understanding him, or we're not really seeing him interact with his peers like the other kids, and they're recommending it. So we see a lot of referrals coming from like milestone appointments with doctors, starting preschool or starting some kind of school. And then we do have a good number of parents who are just proactive,
Yeah.
which is awesome. But one of our specialty areas we support families with is therapy for autistic children. So that's something that we get a lot of referrals for.
Absolutely. And the growing number will, I'm sure, be increasing more. Next year, we'll see a whole nother set
Yeah.
of ratios coming out. That'll be interesting. And in that, it's so important that people understand kind of the availability of speech therapists for specific learning disabilities, autism. What about where would you suggest someone go if they aren't? My head just went. If what kind of things at home can we start doing as parents if we're practicing our with our toddlers, for example? What things should we be looking for? What are those milestones if there's new parents listening?
Oh, what are the communication milestones they should be
Yeah.
reaching? I mean, generally speaking, we say, at least one word by age 1, at least 50 by 2, but most kids will have around 250 by 2.
Wow.
So that's kind of the simplest. Other things, at least in autistic kids who are young will see differences in joint attention. So, neurotypical joint attention would be, child looks at the toy and then they look at their play partner and then they look back at their toy, and it's this referencing going back and forth. Whereas with a lot of young autistic kids, what we'll see is their attention will shift in different ways. So they might have a longer period of time where they're paying attention to the toy or the object versus referencing back and forth the toys and the object. And, I'm happy you brought that up, because I am a person who takes the strengths-based approach, right? So when we talk about autism, we don't talk about, quote, red flags. We talk about autism as a neurotype. And, there are no red flags. There are characteristics of
Yeah.
autism. So a lot of people might say this child struggles with joint attention or has difficulties with joint attention, but in reality, it's this child has a different kind of joint attention. This child has autistic joint attention, and autistic joint attention does not look like neurotypical joint attention.
I think it's so important that we're breaking those stigmas, because it's so much new information for so many people that don't know it. And it's really hard, especially I mean, of course, on parents, but teachers. How do you see you guys as speech therapists helping out the teachers when it comes to that school age kiddos?
Yeah, I think the biggest, I don't want to say misconception, but I think maybe mindset barrier it's more of, is that we can't give kids the individual attention they need because there's too many of them in a classroom. And when we go in with that mindset into a classroom, then that prevents us from even trying to better accommodate a child. And it's a long-term plan, right? So if we do what's easy, everything else is going to be hard. If we do what's hard now, everything else in school is going to be easy. So if we can take the time to really figure out what a child's individual needs are up front, everything else is going to be easier and happen more naturally. And we won't have to come back and it doesn't have to be a reactive to every problem kind of situation. Something that I really preach is, how can we be more proactive about our kids' needs? Because right now it feels like we're in this world where we're just solving the problem of dysregulation. Like, oh, the kid's dysregulated. How can we get them back to be regulated? And it's like, well, why aren't we talking about how we can be more proactive? Why aren't we talking about how can we better set up the environment or set up the routines for this child or their accommodations, so that we don't have to play the game of, I think of it like a seesaw,
Yeah.
balancing dysregulated, regulated. Like, that's not a safe, comfortable state for kids to live in.
Absolutely. No, that's really hard. When it comes to other forms of therapies, what do you generally see are there things that are related to speech, like maybe myofascial things, things related to the mouth, or do you guys also have maybe like partners or people you refer for that purposes? Because I know that some friends that have their son, had a lot of trouble swallowing at the very beginning, and the first thing they did was actually send them to a speech therapist, who then sent them to the myofascial
Mm.
people. But what about that? What do you think? Kind of, do you know when to refer someone for those purposes too?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that I personally feel like every therapist should be as specialized as possible. And it's hard because sometimes when you're starting a business and you just want to take all the clients, and there was a time where I was seeing so many different kids, and different things. And it was like I was just spending all my time learning, trying to figure out, rather than trying to hone down, see a select number of types of kids, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, absolutely. There can be for, I guess, whatever the concern is, there can be a lot. Like if the concern is their clarity of speech, versus like swallowing, they would need to go to a feeding specialist. Oral facial myology, we do some of that here. But I would say those are all things that are pretty different than like the therapy we do for autistic kids, you know, whereas the therapy for autistic kids is more based on building their communication, you know, maybe using devices to communicate or any kind of AAC, really focusing on, you know, helping improve engagement with back and forth interaction and a lot more play-based.
I love that too. Play-based is just
Mm-hmm.
the best type of therapy, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my son, that was his best success in therapies were those play-based therapies. And it was so hard too because he's profoundly gifted. And so you find yourself on the edge of algebra. How do we do that? Kind of a thing. And but there are so many ways. In fact, I'm excited to talk about sensory stuff because we are going to go to a new sensory gym this
Mm-hmm.
fall as a part of a scholarship program that we got. And I'm really interested and excited to see, number one, because physical activity is hard for him, and he struggles with doing a lot of physical activities, and I think this will be really great. But number two, they involve math and science and things that he loves integrated into this gym that, you know, also has like lights and sounds and all these, you know, things that kind of
Sounds awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
Apparently they use the program for like NASA and the NFL and the NBA to help players kind of get to be more aware of everything around them on when they're on the court or on the field and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So, and you know, fast reflexes for making decisions quickly and all of those things. So it'll be really interesting. Tell us a little bit about the kind of the sensory part, and for those who you know, don't know maybe what sensory is, explain that first and then we'll go deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, our sensory system is really how we take in everything around us. So, as we all know, you know, the basic five senses: sight, hearing, smelling, taste, touch. I was like, did I get them? We also have our vestibular system, which is our sense of balance. And then we have our proprioceptive system, which is where we take in input from our muscles and our joints. So, you know, I really got deep into understanding sensory because the majority of autistic kids have sensory differences. And when I was even just starting out, before I knew anything, I had literally, I did not know anything. I would show up every week going, what did I get myself into? I had the very first autistic boy I ever worked with, who was 3. He was non-speaking. And I saw him for 3-hour sessions because this was this play-based type of therapy. And I'd spend 3 hours every Monday morning thinking, what am I doing? This is so hard. I cannot get him to engage with me. He would just zip around in and out of all the rooms in the clinic. The only time he would ever sit still is if he had cars. But when he had cars, I didn't know how to get him engaged with me. And it was like every week I had no idea what to do. And my supervisor came up to me one week and said, hey, we want you to take a video of that kid for our next supervisors meeting so we can review your therapy. And that meant me taking a video and them 20 supervisors in the clinic watching it.
Wow.
And my heart just sank. I was like, oh my God, are they going to fire me? Like, there's no way. They're going to think I'm the worst therapist of all time. But what that did was kind of lit a fire for me to figure out, what can I do so that I actually look like I'm helping this child. And I have this whole thing on video, which is the best part because it was so long ago now. But I have this on video where I set up a CD player and put on some music, and he ends up climbing up onto the table, and we start dancing together, and then he looks down and he jumps into my arms, and then he runs back up onto the table again, and I look at him and I say, "Go," and he says, "Go." And that was like one of the first things I'd heard from him. And we just did that over and over for the entire rest of the session. And it was for him, that movement that really helped engage him. It was the music, it was the movement. And anyway, they ended up hating that clip because they were so upset I let him stand on the table.
Oh, goodness.
I know. I was like, this is like an 18-inch table, the toddler table. So it's just kind of funny because then they're like, why did you let him stand on the table? And I'm like, did you not see like how amazing this was?
Yeah.
So that kind of, I started working a lot with the OTs in the clinic, the occupational therapists, and doing a lot of co-treatment sessions together and learning more about the sensory system. But I had kids where all they needed was, to be pushed on the swing or jumping or running or deep squeezes or some kind of like sensory experience. And that really is what helped them to become more regulated.
It's so interesting, our body's responses to things. And even in my own experience, I just got my diagnosis like 2 years ago. And so when I kind of searched back into my childhood to figure those interesting things out, one of a sensory thing that always was for me was hearing, and I have these little tiny ears, and so I had always kind of thought that it was, well, probably is because of that, the sensory hearing. But the garbage truck, I was so afraid of garbage trucks for my whole life because I would have to like hide under pillows when they came in the 70s, and date myself there, because they didn't have, the quiet breaks or anything. And it was just like this horrible experience for me. And it wasn't until the last maybe like 8 months that my husband was like, we really need to talk about how garbage day is still such a hard day for you. And it's like, you don't have to have those. That doesn't happen for you anymore. But really, it created so much trauma for me. And, back then it was just like, you're being a drama queen. You're just overreacting, all of these things. So I think it's great that now we kind of give humanity and awareness to those things for children, and understand that, like, when they show pain and fear in something around them in their environment, that the best thing to do is look into it and realize that it's their own way of trying to communicate through their behavior whatever is happening. And the best parent and adult you can be is to discover more about what that might be and be curious about how you can help navigate those changes for them and support them. And yeah, now I can handle Fridays. I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, what I think one of the most important things to know about our sensory systems is that our sensory systems affect how we experience the world.
Yeah.
So we cannot possibly be able to understand how a child might experience the world if we haven't lived in their exact sensory system. So that's why, like what you're mentioning, and just validating and coming with curiosity and compassion is so important, because just because, it didn't hurt you doesn't mean it doesn't hurt them. And just because some woman went through labor with no meds and whatever doesn't mean that anyone could do it and not experience pain, right? We all have different ways that we experience the world. But, your story is not uncommon. And I have an autistic friend, an SLP, her name's Jamie Boyle, and I wrote about her in my book because it's a story of, she got an autism diagnosis at 35. She enrolled in my sensory course to help her clients because she was an SLP, and she had no idea that she was actually learning about herself. Like, that wasn't her intention. And she said that after learning her sensory needs and making some simple accommodations in her life, and one of them was major sensitivity to sounds, but after giving herself some, accommodations and things that she could do differently, it just completely changed her world. I mean, she went from living her whole life overwhelmed and overstimulated throughout the day, and then melting down every single time she got home every day. And just making some of those simple changes completely changed the way she was able to live. And she didn't have to come home and experience meltdowns every day. And, I wrote about that in my book because it's just the idea that how incredible would it be if we could help our kids with this from the time they're really young, instead of having them go through their whole lives before discovering how to make life easier and, feel better for them.
Right. And how do we start to bridge that conversation with our kids? What kind of conversation do we have with them about their senses and how to kind of listen or explain them?
Yeah, I love that question, because it's something I think about all the time. My kids right now are 1, 3, 5, and just turned 8. So, and my 8-year-old is super, super sensitive to a lot, anxious. So we've had a lot of conversations about things like this too, of course, with our clients in the clinic as well. But really just helping them to understand, first of all, like, this is something that I like versus something I don't like, So in our clinic, we'll have a questionnaire for kids to kind of go through, and we'll give them different scenarios, and they can talk about if they like it or if they don't like it. And if it's certain sounds, like, do you like when the music is really loud, or do you like when the music is really soft? Or do you like music while you're doing your homework, or do you like it to be quiet when you're doing your homework, or do you like the door to be open so you can hear the wind, or do you like, the TV running in the background? And just talking to them about what makes them comfortable. And I think all too often we make assumptions for our kids. Well, I like to do my work in silence, so that means they probably like to do their work in silence too. But for some kids, like, having soft music or something playing in the background can be really calming or regulating for them.
Yeah.
So just starting to, like, when you notice they really don't like something, talking about it, and like you said, coming from a place of curiosity, and maybe even asking more specific questions. Like, I'll do my poor son. I'll be like, well, was it like the sound? Was it the texture? Was it the temperature? Like, what was it exactly? And I try to really dig in to get them to think about it, because a good place to start too is, I like to help, kids or just people in general figure out what their, like, I call sensory triggers, meaning something that, like, this happens and you're just immediately dysregulated. For me, it is wool sweaters.
Oh.
For my partner, Chris, it is like, he's the loudest person. He loves loud music. The kid screaming doesn't bother him, but the second he hears someone crunching, me usually, it's just like, you've got to get out of that room. And sometimes the triggers we have don't necessarily fall in line with other things. Like, we may love music but hate one specific sound. So instead of, like, making generalizations, like, well, am I sensitive to all sounds? I just say, take that one thing out, put it over here. We know that's one of our triggers. And what we know about triggers is we either want to avoid them or try to minimize them. Our job is not to try to get a child to like it.
Yeah. No, compliance. I'm so glad that they're changing, that idea that that's like the most important thing. I think that I've learned so much. I mean, I just had a grandbaby 2 weeks ago. So now I'm a grandma. And
Congrats.
so 20 years of parenting has taught me, and 3 different individuals, which, as well as I do, they're also very different, and you cannot parent the same one the same way as as any other. And it's really, really, now I'm totally lost my train of thought here. Come on, get back to it. I'm having a real trouble today. I'm
That's
just
so funny, because I keep saying, like, on that note, I keep saying, like, you have one kid and then you're like, okay. And then you have the next kid who's probably the opposite of the first. So then you're like, okay, well, I know how to parent this kind of kid because I had that one. And now I know how to parent their opposite, which means when I have the next, it's going to be one of those kids. And then you have the next, and the next is completely different. And then I had my fourth, and my fourth was completely different. I'm like, there is no one way.
There's no tracks.
That's for
There's
sure.
no, yep.
Yeah.
No, there's no one way. And it's important that we really give each kiddo their own, oh, now I know what I was going to say, that we really learn to follow. And that's hard as parents. I think that a lot of parents want to get in there and we know it all. And like you said, we do this, so our kids must like it this way and things. And we really put a lot of ourselves on our kids' lives, are imprinting over them. But it's really, really important that we kind of step back and we learn to follow our kids, and then we can learn about them. And not only in that, they feel cared for and seen and heard and valued when you want to follow, and when you want to, well, show me what you're doing in Minecraft this week. Like, show me the things you're building. And it really can create so much excitement in that relationship building with them when you are willing to do that. And I think you have to just kind of get your ego, kind of kick it back a little and say, and especially these kids today, with they're in this era of information that we have no idea what that's like as a little person. We have to be kind of a little bit understanding that things are gonna happen differently than we've seen ever before. We almost have to ride this wave with them and not expect them, like you said, compliance, because that's not going to work, especially with the really younger generation, who is going to be people we can't relate with as well.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't even work for people like in their 20s right now.
So. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, how generations, how is this even possible, right? How did we all survive?
Yeah.
Oh, by learning. And that's the best thing we can really do. Tell us about your book.
Yeah. So it's called Ready, Set, Connect. I wrote the whole thing before it had a title, and I was like, it was the hardest part of the entire book was the title, and it really came together. Ready, Set, Connect. The whole thing is really about how we can help our kids become more regulated so that they could be more engaged and learn how to communicate. And it was just a step that I really feel as therapists, speech therapists, we miss getting taught. We don't learn those things in school. What we learn is a kid comes to your office, they're not talking. Your job is to get them to talk. Got to work on language, got to work on, and what that results in, at least a lot with autistic kids, is when a kid comes into our office and our goal is, well, I got to get them saying words, that turns into a session that is very, compliance driven and very structured. How can I get them to say the most words? And then what we end up with is a kid who can say, I want juice, I want milk, I want train, I want a lot of things, but then we're not seeing it develop into this abstract, beautiful language. I want juice is not the same as the Spider-Man movie just came out, and if we don't have any plans tomorrow, can we go and can we invite my friends?
Yeah.
That's an entirely different level of language. So in the book, I describe my analogy, which had originally been published in the American Speech Language Hearing Association publication, about how, language development is like a staircase, and we have regulation and engagement as those bottom steps. And if we can't first work on stabilizing those steps, we will never end up with a staircase that is stable. Mm-hmm. So it's really, a collection of stories of different kids I've worked with, the concepts I've learned from that, and then how, you as the reader can take those concepts and start implementing them. But really about the importance of a connection driven approach as opposed to compliance driven.
I love that. And I love it even more when I tell you this next story, because the very first interaction we had with DJ when he was diagnosed at 16 months. So it was very early. It was and I don't even know if he had a diagnosis yet, as we were just with early intervention. I'm like trying to remember. But that was one of the therapists. We had a couple. They tried, like you said, tried, nothing was working. It didn't feel good. And finally this lady stepped in and she said, well, why don't we try playing Ready, Set, Go? And that was his first like sound word that he made was go as well. And it was, yeah, ready, set, go, high five, ready, set, go, run, ready, set, go, do whatever, jump, ready, and we used that for everything after that. It was like the best thing we had ever learned ever in our, at that beginning stage. And it was just like you said, it was that beginning of creating that relationship. It was him understanding that we were in this with him, and he was a part of it with us. And it was just, I love that therapist. I still, am friends with her on Facebook. Lots of props up to her for doing that. And it wasn't he didn't start speaking until he was 4.5 maybe. And we found that it was diet changes that made our changes for us. But that's a whole different the thing that can be gone into in such detailed discussion. But it's so neat when you make that connection. And now I like to joke, and you'll probably be able to find this funny. Now DJ today is speaking. I don't he's not wonderful in his rep, reciprocal conversations back and forth. He does study languages, so he knows 134 languages.
Wow.
How to identify them by text or sound. If he hears it, he'll understand exactly what language he's hearing. It's incredible. But I always joke that he knows 130 languages, but he doesn't speak English very well. So won't make that communication. He doesn't do that very. We're still working on those skills. But it's interesting that how unique language is for everyone, and really how important it is as a parent to discover what's best for your child, as far as their language needs or support systems go. How can we find out more about you, support you, all of that good stuff?
I'm online as Sensory SLP. So on social as Sensory SLP, you can get Ready, Set, Connect book. If you go to readysetconnectbook.com, you could get the book. There are also, it's also on Amazon, but if you go to that website, readysetconnectbook.com, you will also get access to bonuses. So you get a free training that comes with the book. You get the audio book for free as well when you go to that page. A long free event is coming up for anyone who purchased the book. So lots of awesome stuff. Nice coming up. Yeah. Okay. So at readysetconnectbook.com, that will lead you to the link and to all the bonuses.
And Sensory SLP, where you can find her on her other social medias and good stuff like that. Trying to type that. Come on, fingers. And there we go. Perfect.
Amazing.
Definitely go and check her out, support her, check out the book, learn how you can better understand how to help your child if they are struggling with speech. And of course, go and connect mostly to learn more about all. It sounds like you have some really great resources on your page and everything. So I'm excited to go over and check that out. And it was so nice to have you on today and to meet you and get to know you better. And I look forward to staying in touch for sure.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. So grateful to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
You too.